scores for the testing. So the district is mandated to keep the detailed raw score of every single test that they have done. If you request, for instance, school records, they should have the answer to how the child performed to each question. No. So
No, what you get is you can get raw scores, standard scores, composite scores, scaled scores, but those are all summary scores. The reason you can't get the answer to every question is because that would invalidate the test. So the tests are valid because the questions and the answers aren't public knowledge, but if we started handing out the tests, if everybody had access to the WISC, then everybody would get a perfect score. So then they wouldn't be valid anymore.
But I mean, if you wanted to compare from one year to the other, as you mentioned, to see how many
Right,
questions
well, the
they
raw
got right,
scores, you could get
they're
that.
mandated to report those.
Yeah, you can ask the raw scores, but don't ask for the raw data. Just ask for the number they got right.
And that's in the CUME?
You could, well, it should be, before you get a school assessment and you talk to the psychologist who's going to do it, I would request that they put in the number correct, which is called the raw score, for each test, each subtest, and that way, and tell them that your thinking is that you want to be able to compare from year to year. Completely reasonable. It gives you no information about the details of each question. It doesn't invalidate the test. It's completely reasonable. What it is extra work for the psychologist. And that's why it doesn't always get done, Clarence.
Interesting.
But if you ask, they're not going to have to do it.
My son's about to have his 3-year, one of his 3 years, and I got a call from the school psychologist saying, well, there's really no question about him being eligible. He's ASD.
Right.
So I don't really see that it's necessary for us to do the psychoeducational testing.
Okay, good. I'm really glad you asked that question. So just because we know that a kid with autism is always going to be a kid with autism doesn't mean that testing doesn't give you more information than just eligibility. Testing gives you lots of information about each area and how's their visual processing, how's their visual motor processing, how's their memory doing, how are they doing in achievement or in behavior, or again, that psychologist is a lazy psychologist. And school psychologists, it's not really fair because the problem is they have too much on their plate. And as a private psychologist, I can decide how big my plate is. But a school psychologist cannot decide how big their plate is. And so the district just keeps loading more and more and more, and they try to get out of it because it's just too stressful for them. So that's what that psychologist is trying to do. And if I were you, I would insist that you need more information than just eligibility. And you would like a full evaluation because one hasn't been done in 3 years. And a lot happens to a child in 3 years. A lot.
I initially agreed with it because the first time he had a 3-year, the school psychologist tested him on a Friday afternoon in May with 2 5-minute breaks after the entire school had been outside all morning on an assembly. And basically wrote a report that said he was on a low level of cognitive functioning, which is not true. But that was okay because that got him into the help group. The next one, the school psychologist was amazing. I said, he knows when he's being tested, he won't respond when he's being tested, he's not going to do it all in one sitting. And this man met him over probably a 5-week period, watched him in class, did everything, and the results, just like the one 3 years before, were completely all over the board and inconsistent and gave us really no true sense of where he was.
Well, but what it did do was tell you that he has an uneven profile and inconsistent performance, and that's data. That's data too. It just wasn't all the same, and most kids with special needs, they're all over the place. They've got certain areas they do much better in, and other areas that are a lot more challenging.
Cindy, would you rather have the questions left to the very end, because I just want to make sure you get through your agenda for the day? Or would you just-
Actually, it's okay with me if people ask questions. Yeah, but thanks.
Are accommodations during testing allowed? I mean, I know these are standardized tests, but for instance, if the child has visual perception issues, presenting the material at an angle when you're testing them. Or my own kiddo, for example, you sit him on the floor, you quiz him on, his ABCs. You just ask him the question, he'll get them all wrong. The second I put my hands on his knees, he gets everything 100%.
That's interesting.
For example, I don't know why it happens like that. They tested it at school also because they couldn't believe me, but that's what happens with
Okay.
anything.
So
Asking numbers, wrong. Hands on the knees.
So a little
The OT explains
deep
my
pressure is going a long way. Okay, now that's good to know. That's a good OT observation for your child. But your question about accommodations to standardized testing is a good question. Standardized testing is supposed to be just that, standardized, which means you're supposed to do it the way the manual says you're supposed to do it, and the way that they said that it was tested in the same way as they did with all the kids in the standardization sample. However, sometimes you have to make changes. It's okay to make changes, but you have to say in the report that you made the changes. And then you have to say these results have to be looked at with caution, because this wasn't administered in a standardized way, and you have to say that you did. So if you have no choice, it is okay, but you just have to, you just have to come clean with what you did, that's all. Okay? Okay, so one reason we test, like we said, is for not just eligibility for the school, but also diagnosis from a medical standpoint. And that's what a private psychologist can do that a school psychologist can't do. And it matters, just because someone has, autistic-like traits, you want to know exactly what does that look like, and, which areas are harder, which areas need more attention, so it matters. Also, you want to know how social-emotional factors play into testing. So, is this child, what's the personality, the temperament? How do they deal with stress? What do they do when they get upset? Is this a kid who tantrums a lot? Is this a kid who hurts other kids? Is this a kid who hurts himself? There's a lot of social-emotional factors, and mostly you're going to get that kind of information from the questionnaires, from talking to the parents and the teacher, and also from observing the child as you're working with them. Okay? But they're very important. I don't think, unless it's a eligibility for emotional disturbance, I don't think the school does as good a job on that part as a private psychologist does, because they legally don't have to. That's why, unless it's an ERIC's evaluation for emotional disturbance. And then you want to know what the learning style is for your child, and that's a great reason to test them, even if you already know they still have autism. Is he a visual learner, a multimodal learner? Is he an auditory learner? These are things that we can figure out with testing that, okay, so he has autism, but what about it? Okay? Okay, and then here's our accommodations and modifications section, where testing will help you to get extra time on the SAT, or like a one-on-one tester, or someone to take notes for you in high school if you can't write and listen at the same time, which I can test for. And if you can't do that, then I can tell the school, this kid needs a note taker in order to access the curriculum like everybody else does. And so, these things are all important, and these are things that we can get for a kid to help make school easier and level the playing field a little bit. Okay? Wake up. Okay, now, I love this slide, but I'm afraid this slide scares a lot of people. Is anybody afraid of this slide? This is important because if you're gonna understand assessment, you gotta understand there's a place where most people are, and there's a place where some people are kind of on the outliers, and then there's way out there where almost nobody is. Okay, so that's how I'm gonna keep it very simple. Okay? So here's the mean, right? So the blue part, that's within one standard deviation of the mean. So on all tests where people test under normal curve, which is most things, 68% of us get within one standard deviation of the mean. So if you're a class and I'm teaching to you and I'm teaching a certain thing, 68% of you are going to get it just like that because you're the average, okay? Then, as you go 2 standard deviations out, it's another 13%. Okay, these kids are going to get bored because they're pretty smart and like they already knew what you were saying. These kids, you're losing them. They need it repeated 15 times, they need it shown 20 different ways, they're having a much harder time. So these kids and these kids, I'm not reaching when I'm teaching, okay? These kids need to be in the GATE program because they're so bright they could come and teach it. And these kids really are going to need, maybe a different placement, a very different situation. And so it's important to know that in a lot of things in life, about 2/3 of us, about 68% of us, are about in the middle, okay? And then there's some people who stand out as pretty amazing, and then there's a very few people who stand out as incredible. And then there's a good percentage of kids, of people, who are having kind of a tough time grasping something, and then these people who really need help all the time. So that's statistics. And what you need to know is that if I give you an IQ test and you end up right there on the day that I test you, that doesn't mean that you're going to end up right there every single time I test you. It means you're going to end up like around there, okay? That's called a confidence interval. Now, I'm going to get why this is important, so don't fall asleep. This confidence interval means that, let's say 95% of the time, I can pretty much say that if I give you that same test, you're going to fall right in there. So that means you're going to be in the average to above average range, right there. Now, confidence intervals are important because it gives us a way to talk about test scores that gives you a little wiggle room. Okay, confidence intervals give you wiggle room. So let's say I give you a test and you get an 89. Okay, 89 is just at the top end of the low average range. Okay, but with 95% confidence, I can say you're going to score somewhere between 82 and say 96. Okay? So now that's now I might be able to justify you're getting extra services because your confidence interval goes down to 82, and that's a lot lower than 89. So that's why when someone denies you services on one number, you want to ask, what is the confidence interval? And you should ask your assessor not only to put in raw scores, but to put in confidence intervals in the data they report, because it gives you more wiggle room, and that's a very important point. Did you guys understand that? My mother's asleep. This is bad. Okay.
All tests or examination are gonna have this. They're gonna have this statistic.
Most constructs in life, and this is just a statistical interesting thing, most constructs in life fall under this normal curve, this bell curve. So most things that we measure look like that, which is interesting, right? That's why statistics is so interesting.
My kids have some testing. I found somewhere that your data seems like percentage is not related to sigma. And then school teacher told me because the distribution is a normal distribution. It's a normal curve.
It's a normal
It's
curve.
not abnormal, they told me. You said most of the testing should be normal distribution like this, right?
Most,
Most of the testing, the data should be the normal distribution, just like.
most things that we test fall under the normal
Yeah.
curve.
Okay, because I found some of their error, they told me that's not error because the distribution is not a normal distribution.
Is not a normal distribution.
And then
Some
that-
things,
that-
some things don't fall under a normal curve, but most of the things that we measure in assessment
Okay,
do.
they should be doing a assessment
Right.
more than what I expect that help me assess the story.
Like, think about like how long somebody lives, right? So say most people live between, what, like 72 and 82, right? Some people die in their 60s and some people die even earlier than that. And some people live till 95 and then a couple of people live more than that. So it's the same thing. So a lot of things that we measure fall under a normal curve. And, you know, it's a lot of averages. It's how insurance companies work. It's how, you know, it's how they know how much to like car insurance, life insurance. This is exactly how it all works. That way they know how much to charge you.
But
Okay.
for kids with special needs, they're not gonna fall into those averages.
No, our kids, okay, well, there's gifted kids and they have special needs too. They're gonna fall out here, okay? Some of our kids fall in here. Some are in the average range, it's true. But, you know, certainly my kid is down in the bottom 2%. And most of the kids that I see are having a really hard time, because those are the kids that are referred for testing, right? Okay. Right, so there's lots of different kinds of scores. Okay, so let's say we do an IQ test, okay? Well, that test has 10 little subtests, and each of those little subtests has a scaled score. Okay, so that's what these are, scaled scores. And then we take those subtests and we group them together in certain ways, and then we get standard scores. And then we put all the standard scores together and we get composite scores. So it's confusing. And that's why we always put percentiles down. Because that way you don't have to memorize like what goes where. You just have the percentiles, which are the same across everything. Now what I want you to know is that the 25th percentile is in the average range. It doesn't mean you got it 25%, okay? It means that your obtained score was the same as or better than 25% of all the people who took this test. So it ends up that average is between the 25th and the 73rd percentile. That's a really big spread, right? And high average is the 75th 75th to the 90th, superior, and then very superior, this is gifted, is in the 99th percentile. You see how small it is, just 98 to 99. It's only 2%. So percentiles are different than how we think about percents. So actually, if you're in the 30th percentile, you're doing pretty good. It's in the average range. It doesn't sound like it is, but it is. Okay. Okay, then, to confuse you even more, there are different kinds of scores. There's T-scores and Z-scores, and then ETS, the Educational Testing Service, has their own set of scores for SATs, and so this gets confusing, and this is why I need a little bit of help with all this. But I just want you to know that there's all these different kinds of standard scores. Okay, so the most important thing to remember, every single word that I just said, remember this. Okay, don't compare scaled or standard scores or percentiles on the same test year after year. Because we're not looking at the standard scores year after year. What are we looking at? Raw scores, that's right. That's what you want to look at. Because otherwise, it's going to look like your child's making no progress at all. And they are.
I have a question about that. How do you know that that progress is not just due to maturation?
That's a great question. And the reason you know it's not just due to maturation is because all the other kids are also maturing. So as your kid goes from 6 to 7 years old, all the other kids are going from 6 to 7 years old. So the 6-year-olds have an average score, and then there's your kid's score, which is much lower. Then the 7-year-olds, it's a different comparison group. They've matured. So not only have they learned more, but they've matured. They get more right, so does your kid. Now, to the extent that they matured more than your kid matured, they both went up 1 year chronologically. But I bet your kid did better on that test. And maybe it's because they know how to take tests better at 7 than they do at 6. Maybe they know how to follow directions better. Maybe they're on a different medication. Maybe their attention is better. Maybe it was just a better day when they took the test when they were 7 periods. That's confidence intervals, right? We talked about that. So be sure to ask the psychologist to report the confidence intervals around numbers so you have wiggle room to make your point. Oh. Look, Mom, it's your granddaughter.
I know. Is she gorgeous?
Okay, now we're going to talk about profile patterns, and we talked a little bit about this. Our kids are never having even profile across skills. They always have things they're good at, things they're not good at, maybe the things they're good at aren't like in the gifted range, but they're relatively a lot better than the other things that they're not good at, so that's a strength for them. And so you want to look at the pattern. That's why you don't want to just look at the composite score. Don't just look at the IQ. Look at the component parts. Look at the details, because that's where you get the information. Okay, so that's kind of what I already said. All right, there I am at the village.
Gee, this is what?
This is not. So I put these pictures in for you guys to laugh, okay? All right, so here's IQ. So it's supposedly a measure of intelligence or ability. We use the WISC-5. A lot of districts don't even allow you to give an intelligence test. Sometimes with our kids, I give the TONI, which is the test of nonverbal intelligence. Because if our kids are nonverbal or functionally nonverbal, then the test of nonverbal intelligence just allows you to point to an answer without saying the answer. So it's nonverbal reasoning. It doesn't give you as rich an understanding as the WISC does, but you get what you can get.
What about the Raven? I thought Raven was big.
Say again?
The Raven, I thought that was supposed to be big for.
Yes, that's not one, that's a matrices test. And that's another nonverbal it's an approximation of intelligence. Because when you do the nonverbals, they're all approximations, because they only looks at one part.
You said that is now allowed, they cannot do active testing.
Say again?
Is that allowed, they cannot do active testing anymore?
It's not a law.
Well, in Los Angeles Unified, you can't do it.
Other school districts still can do it.
Pasadena allows,
Cannot do it. So it's
no, they can't.
Not standalone.
No, when they're
Okay. So other school districts still.
Why not?
That's a good question too. It's because, it's a very good reason, actually. It's because a lot of these tests are not fair to kids from backgrounds that aren't the same as the white male guys who made the test. And so they may not have had access to, just as a part of their culture, to some of the things that these tests assume that you know. And so before, when we allowed IQ tests, there was a disproportionate number of African Americans in special education. And it wasn't because they really had lower IQs. It was because people have different, they have different lives, they're exposed to different things, and Caucasian, male-dominated society was finally decided was not the standard. So that's why.
But why hasn't that been updated to include it?
Well, like she said, there are some what are called culture-free tests, and
They do the Raven, because on the other side of the spectrum, my daughter, they did the Raven and she went to Ivy.
okay.
So,
So-
ISD does that.
So there are culture-free tests. The school doesn't use a culture-free IQ test, they just don't do IQ tests now. But there are culture-free tests. It's a very contentious, hot topic, but it's valid. And it doesn't, someone finally raised their hand and said, why is 80% of the class African American across the country in special ed? And it's ridiculous.
So if we had a private, assessor, then is the IQ, is that something that would help at all in an IEP?
Absolutely.
Probably.
Yes, and the reason is, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the school's results. They never gave an IQ test because they can't. And then they say that the kid is performing up to their potential on the achievement tests. But then when I give them an IQ test, we look to see, you know what? They don't have an average IQ. Maybe they have a much lower IQ than the school assumed, or maybe they have a much higher IQ. And even though they're achieving in the average range, they should be doing much better, because the truth is their IQs are much higher.
So maybe they can't access the curriculum,
Right,
even
and-
though they have a
Right,
high
so there's some
IQ.
sort of learning difference there, but because they perform in the average range, it gets ignored. Okay, so yes, very important.
When is the IQ valid? Our son had an IQ, but we did it independently. And so
You did it when?
we did it when he was,
Independent.
yeah, but he was, how old was he, 7? He was 7. And so I understand, you know, why IQs can't be given to the full culture because, you know, everyone's not can't access all the information that's on the IQ, and I get that part. But when is that still valid at 7, or when does it? And there were a lot of things that were happening with him.
Right.
You know, we didn't have a developmental pediatrician at the time, so you know there were a lot of things with ADHD, and so we know a lot more now.
So there have been longitudinal across time studies of IQ. So they'll take a kid's IQ across their lifetime, 3, 10, 20, 30, okay, so they just to answer that question. And at least for typically developing kids, your IQ is set at about 3 years old. It is unbelievable.
Yeah, they say that.
Now,
Have
yes,
they, have
you-
they done that study with kids with special needs?
Okay, so now
particularly
let me get to the
autism?
next
Yeah.
part of it. Right, so now let me get to the next part of it. Now, for kids with special needs, there's no way that's the case. Because at 3, I mean, you could all give me examples. Our kids could not sit, they don't know what taking a test is, they don't understand what go fast means. If you say the question in a different way than they know how questions are supposed to be asked, or you use a synonym that they're not familiar with, and that can be true at 7, that can be true at 10, and our kids have delayed verbal skills and even delayed processing and social skills. And so, yes, with our kids, it changes, but it even makes me wonder how valid the number is to begin with, whether we're doing it at 7 or at 25, because our kids' brains work differently, and these tests were not made for kids whose brains are going. I don't have the leeway to ask a question 5 different ways of a kid with special needs, and that's what I need to do in order to get them to understand what I'm asking, but I'm not allowed to, because then I'm not giving the test the way it's given to everybody else. And so that's why a lot of these tests, especially for the younger ones or the kids that are more affected, they don't always have a lot of meaning. It's often more meaningful to do the observation, to get information from the parents and the teachers. You know, you have to be creative if you can't sit a kid down and test them.
You know, because a lot of our kids don't have good visual attention, nor are they motivated.
Right.
You know, in the case of my own son, I just type all these tests, you know, relationship relevance,
Yeah.
very material. But on the other hand, you want to know, what am I going to fight for this kid? Like, how far can this kid get? Is this as far as, is this good? Is this a good place? Or am I supposed to fight to get one?
You know,
How do you know?
I think you're absolutely right, and I feel the same way sometimes, that you know, the tests, the results of the tests aren't valid because I wasn't able to, it presumes that you have some sort of connection with somebody who just may not be able to connect with you, and that there's some level of, I understand, just not there with our kids. And so I don't disagree with you, but where they are important is that I do have to establish eligibility in order to get your kid services. And so if the kid can't take the test, that tells me something too, okay? So if I'm sitting with a 10-year-old and, you know, and he can't sit still, and he's got a horrible attitude, and he doesn't understand what I'm saying, and he's trying to pencil all over my desk just to, you know, be difficult, you know, that's information. And so I hear what you're saying, but we have to do it anyway. But when I'm with a kid like that, I'm trying to do a lot of what we call alternative assessment than standardized assessment, because I want to get information that's going to help, not information where I just say, well, he just wasn't cooperative and I got no data, because that's not helpful.
Isn't it important to establish a baseline?
Yeah, if you can get
Even at
one,
young
Marcy,
age.
if you can
Yeah.
get one.
Yeah.
Also, we look at work samples. So sometimes I'll ask the parents to bring me in recent work, report cards. So, it's just alternative assessment. And you do whatever you have to do to get the data that, you need to help. And sometimes it just needs to be qualitative, not quantitative.
Are there intelligence tests that are outside of standardized tests that can give you an indication of someone's true intelligence, meaning their ability to learn? Not, presenting them with, having to test them in, the standardized way. Are there tests that exist outside of that realm where you can make the accommodations that the kids, need, that anyone needs, really, to really, unlock the potential, or to find out what they really are capable of learning?
Yes, there are. Not everybody has access to them. The school districts don't always have access
And
to
that
them.
I understand, because I know they're kind of working with their thing, but
Yeah.
just out of curiosity for myself, because I know the school can only do so much, but, just to know what my daughter is really capable of, I'm
Right.
wondering if there are some tests that exist that maybe somebody else can administer, maybe it has nothing to do with the school,
Right, well, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence. This is like a whole big
Right,
discussion.
right.
There's emotional intelligence,
Mhm.
there's social intelligence, and there's tests of all those different things. And there's also different kinds of ways of testing people. And, what we call intelligence among the typically developing world, that's just something we made up as this means intelligent. And that doesn't mean that that's
Well,
what
I
it
mean their
is.
ability to learn. I mean it.
Well, their ability to learn is
Which is
different.
It is different, and
It-
that's
that- that's not-
that's what I'm actually asking about, so I'm saying, I don't think typical intelligence tests measure somebody's ability to learn. I
That's
think it's-
actually not what's being measured.
Right,
No.
so that's what I'm asking, is their ability to learn, their potential to learn. Are there tests that measure that?
But the question
I
is,
would have
what are they supposed to learn that you're gonna measure? So that's the thing. I mean, intelligence tests are most highly correlated with academic performance. They're predictive most accurately of how well somebody is gonna do in academia, in school. So in a way, they're already predefined what intelligence is what how you show how much you can learn what's being taught at school, correlated with that. So when you say, can we measure some intelligence to learn, but to learn what? Because the current intelligence tests have defined the what as academics, pretty much. I think that's correct, right?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Correlated with
Right, but I mean,
academic
somebody could
performance.
flunk out of school and be brilliant in business, or someone can be brilliant in science and flunk out of school, or in
happens all the
art,
time.
or music. I mean,
All
there's,
the
Look at
time.
Bill Gates.
yeah, that's what I'm
right.
saying,
Yeah.
it's.
And he's on the spectrum.
Right, but you know what I'm saying, so while someone may not do well in academia per se, that's not the only,
That's true.
Right,
So I'm
right,
just
yeah.
curious if there's other ways
course
to
there is.
measure.
I
And are
don't
there other
know.
Is it-
Yes, Clarence.
Didn't I ask that the last time? I
Yes.
said, what about testing for our kids? Because you know what I do with our sons? I figure out what they're good at, and I focus on that, and I've been exposing them to those sorts of things. My son has almost genius level in visual performance. So we've been adding all those things that cause him to be successful at visual performance. Can you speak to that? Is that
You're
something?
doing the right thing, Clarence. parents. I mean, it's up to us, right? And we probably don't even have to measure it because we know, because we're their parents. We know what they're good at. We know what they enjoy, what they tend to go towards. And so that's their strength and their interest. And then you just provide an enriched environment in that area. And that's just what Clarence is saying. My daughter loves music, so she's been taking clarinet for 5 years. And, you know, I mean, all of our kids have special abilities. And it's because we developed them, we pushed them. It's not because somebody measured it and said, oh, this kid has great musical ability. You know, it's because we know, that's all.
One question. My son is 6 years old. He's in kindergarten. He's smart in the way he likes to write. He likes to color. He's already writing paragraphs. But he's struggling a lot with his feelings, with his emotions. And I don't know if it's the right place for him.
Right.
He got bored with the things the teacher is teaching to the other kids. And I don't know what to do. What should I do? I don't have any idea.
That's a good referral question for assessment. Sure. Because you're asking, is the placement right? That's a very common referral question for assessment. Yes.
Are you contracted to any insurance company? Are you one of the
No,
providers?
I'm not. And actually, a lot of insurance companies won't cover the cost of assessment. And the reason why is because legally it's the school's job to do it.
If it's education,
And it's in the purview of education. So that's why you have to kind of work with the school system to get them to pay for it or to pay for it yourself. And but of course your insurance company will pay for therapies, for, you know, for that sort of intervention that you need, but not for the assessment.
Typically, like in the area of the testing, would the district be using, how much of those different things are considered, oh, that's set, they just have poor memory, they have slow processing speeds, we will accommodate it versus working on things to work on certain issues, and what is kind of prevailing thoughts on what is considered set or not, and accommodating versus working on that issue itself?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, I don't think anything is set. And I wouldn't give up on any child. And if they have an interest in understanding something, then a very creative teacher or a very involved parent will figure out a way to get it into their heads in a way they can understand it. And I don't care if somebody says their child is intellectually disabled, and that means they can't learn past a certain level. I've had too many experiences where I didn't think a kid could do it, and he did it. And so I have learned over the years that if somebody wants it bad enough, they're going to figure out how to do it, and the family's going to figure out how to provide the supports. And because otherwise, why are we all here, right? I mean, we have to believe. We have to believe, and that's why we're here.
My daughter with autism is, she's obviously very bright, but she's struggling academically. And right now they're doing psychological testing on her, just a regular triennial. And so I requested from the school psychologist that they test her for dyslexia and dyscalculia. Her father has dyslexia, I suspect that's it. So the school psychologist said to me, I got the assessment plan and that wasn't listed on there. So I wrote it in. And she came to me and she said, well, LAUSD's policy is we don't test for that, but I'm going to administer the tests that would be used to figure out if she has dyslexia, but we're not actually testing her for dyslexia. And
I don't know what that means.
Right. And I said, well, you need to actually test her for dyslexia because I need someone who can tell me definitively
It
if she has
sounds like
dyslexia.
they might be testing her, but they just don't want to write it down. I'm not sure, but I think you should wait for the results.
Okay.
And then, you know, if they didn't answer your question, then you say, okay, now I would like an independent assessment done because you didn't test what I asked you to test. And I wrote down right here that I wanted you to test for dyslexia and you didn't. So, you know, you need to pay for someone else to do it. Yes, you do.
Yeah, well, I want to comment on that actually. That's a really important thing. Really read your IEPs carefully, read the test results carefully, because I did get an independent assessment for my son without going to fair hearing, because I pointed out to the district that they had contradicted themselves on what they were saying about my son over 2 different IEPs. And I said, well, if you're contradicting yourselves, now, mind you, I did get some help from a lawyer in terms of how to word this, but if you're contradicting yourselves and there's something faulty with your testing, and rather than fight me on it, they allowed an independent assessment. And it's a little bit the same thing with the dyslexia, you know, that if you can point out faulty reasoning or contradictions, they're more inclined to let you have an independent assessment.
But that word was not PC, they were not using that terminology anymore in the school districts. They don't say dyslexia anymore, they just say, you know, specific learning disability.
Well, that's because that's an eligibility criteria, and that's all they care about.
Now they're allowed to say, to use the term.
They are?
dyslexia. It just changed recently.
Oh, because I know it was gone for a long time.
They don't want to, but they can.
In terms of independent assessment, what is your experience with the diagnostic center from the state of California?
I don't know anything about it.
It's funded by the California Department of Education, and they do multidisciplinary assessment for children who have a challenging learning profile that the school district cannot figure out.
Oh, does anybody know about that?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
That's right
Southern
off
and
the
Northern.
freeway.
Okay.
Right off the freeway, big building.
Right, Cal State LA's campus.
I have a friend actually went to there, the school district said ADHD, and the mother doesn't believe it, so they go to that diagnostic center, they test like several days and come up with autism. But have to be referred by teacher.
And she graduated from high school.
School, you cannot be referred by parents.
Yeah.
Then might not catch you case.
So does it mean that this is a good place or a bad place? I'm hearing John's daughter graduated from high school and they told him not, that she would never do anything, and you're saying,
I've
What
heard
is-
both myself, I've heard from a family in Houston, and I guess the evaluation was very thorough and he helped them secure a lot of services. And at the same time, I have heard from school psychologists that, you know, it wasn't any better than, you know, some reports sometimes are very good and show information that the district did not catch, and it helps them to secure services, and by the same token, some that are not so good.
I can't give an opinion on that, I'm sorry.
Yes, Ida. Oh, I just wanted to, I know you're going over all the different tests, but, you know, if you're, like, my kids are in 11th grade.
Right.
And, you know, they're gonna be, they have a year left.
Great.
And I know that it's important to get a very good assessment at the end, even though you're not really gonna be using an IEP if they go on to, you know, a 2-year program or a vocational program or so forth, but it's gonna help with securing, not modifications, accommodations.
You know,
And how important is that, and should I have like a full
yes.
assessment?
Yes, in fact, I did that for my daughter at the end of high school. I said, look, I don't know what direction I'm supposed to go in. And I actually asked for a neuropsych assessment.
In 12th grade.
Yes, I did.
Last year.
Yep, and it was beautiful. And this LAUSD employs, I think, 2 neuropsychologists. And I have to hand it to this woman. It was a beautiful report,
So
very thorough.
So you can ask for,
But you have to have a good reason. Now, I asked for the same reason that you asked, and I got it. So, and I didn't have to fight, I just asked, and they gave it to me.
What was beautiful about it?
Well, because it covered everything. Very comprehensive, it gave me good information about where her strengths and areas of weakness were, where she was likely to be successful, where she was likely to have a harder time. You know, because she's right, once you get out of high school, it's hard to know what we should do. Now, that's a whole nother talk.
so it's a neuropsych,
Huh?
neuropsych assessment. Just neuropsych.
Cindy, can you explain the difference between this, like a neuropsych assessment?
Yes, I can. Okay, a neuropsychologist is someone who has 2 additional years of training on top of me. And a neuropsychologist, those 2 additional years of training are typically in a hospital working with brain-injured individuals, traumatic brain injury. And so they work a lot with the medical doctors in the hospital during their 2 years of extra exposure and education. And a neuropsychologist costs a lot more than a regular psychologist. I can do neuropsych testing, and I do, but I'm not a neuropsychologist, and I can't claim that I am. And a neuropsychologist has a different, like different letters after their name. It's a different thing. So it's a psychologist plus 2 extra years of specialty in brain behavior.
So the nervous system plus behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brain and behavior.
Neuropsych.
It's a neuropsychologist.
There is no
Neuropsychologist.
education.
No.
Although neuropsychologists can also do education.
Yes, they can. Right, but that's a very expensive way to have that's an even more expensive way to have testing.
So my school offer my kids to go to so-called neuropsychologist / neurodevelopmental testing. Are they same?
A psychologist can do neurodevelopmental testing.
They offer us another testing. We haven't determined what taking or not. The testing they offer called neuropsychologist / neurodevelopmental test.
Yeah, that would be what we're talking about.
Do you think there are 8, there are 9 times it will benefit them? If we take this testing, are there any benefits? We could get something from that?
What are the benefits? What are the benefits?
What the benefit?
Yeah, what is the benefits? Who want to
What
take
is
that?
the
That can
benefits?
test it, yeah.
Okay. Let's say you had a child with a seizure disorder in addition to autism. Like something that's, yeah, well, a lot of us, right? Something that's really complicating the situation. Let's say you had a kid with like cerebral palsy and autism, or you know, some sort of neurological problem. Sonia, do you have any?
Well,
ADHD.
The way I think about it is a neuropsychologist will try to relate the functional or the, you know, the way the test results come to possible areas of the brain that are involved, and therefore sort of draw some conclusions as to what might be more or less helpful in actually, you know, providing help and whatnot. So they would associate what we know about the brain and what areas the brain is responsible for to functioning, et cetera, learning, or the different domains of learning. So they can correlate those a little more specifically. The psychologist doesn't do that. The psychologist describes, you know, the behaviors, but this one is more goes into, well, there might be this area, that area that's involved, and therefore maybe a little more specific ways of
Can we get more?
I can give a really good example of what something, because we've had this ourselves. So our son has comorbidity, which he has epilepsy, and he has food allergies and other things that are going on with him. He also has autism. So the neuropsychologist looked at the autonomic nervous system, and to look at behavioral issues and how to basically through medicine, how to help that become manageable for him. So it's behavior and the nervous system, the sympathetic part of the nervous system, and how we could get ourselves, get something around that would help him behaviorally. So it was only a neuropsychologist that could really look at that clearly and see that when he was agitated, that was what was going on with his nervous system. It wasn't the seizure disorder. It was ADHD along with the behavior, and then how we could make it all work with the nervous system.
Did you do this by yourself or school did?
That cost $140,000.
Actually, right now,
That I didn't pay for.
school did that.
No.
Okay.
That's a longer discussion. I don't want to take too much time from Cindy.
I will talk with you.
Yes.
The difference between ACT and SAT, is it SAT is more IQ test?
Actually, the difference between those two tests are just that some colleges want you to have the SAT and some colleges want you to have the ACT. And so...
It's not because SAT
no.
or IQ?
No. In fact, neither one is an IQ test. Neither one is an IQ test. Those are achievement tests. Yeah. Or entrance. They're entrance tests. They're,
Not
college.
for IQ.
No way. Okay. It's 9:35. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.